The Orlando Magic are back to work. So what are their goals for the second half of the season? Well, it's obvious today on Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is February 18th. It will be February 19th, 2025. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD and on Blue Sky at PhilipRR. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we'll get to part two of our conversation with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel. We'll talk about the Orlando Magic's decisions at the trade deadline and what the Magic's long-term future looks like and why this end of the season is important for that. Plus, we will chat the Magic's goals for the second half of the season or for the post-All-Star break portion of the season. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. First, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day. Every day you can make Locked On Magic an even bigger part of your day with the Locked On Magic Daily Newsletter. It's the one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Magic newsletter. As I mentioned, the Orlando Magic got back to practice on Tuesday. Had a late practice. I literally got back maybe 2 hours ago, hour and a half ago, as I'm recording this at about 8 o'clock on 8 o'clock on Tuesday night. The Magic are back to work. We will talk more about the specifics of that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic. But I want to get this part out first. Jalen Suggs did not participate in the contact portions of practice. He did some running, according to Jamal Mosley, but was still limited to non-contact. So one of the Magic's big goals for the second half of the season is not yet realized. And a big piece of what's left for the Magic, a big piece of what the Magic have left to accomplish this season or this offseason or this season is to get healthy. And we're going to talk more about that with Jason coming up here in a moment. But the Orlando Magic have not been healthy. They've played 97 minutes, 6 games with Jalen Suggs, Paolo, Banchero, and Franz Wagner on the floor all at the same time. And this has created this weird atmosphere about this team. Yes, we know that the Orlando Magic, we know that the Orlando Magic are probably better than their record. I mean, you are what your record says you are. We're going to own that the Magic are 27-29 right now. And whatever record they finish with, we're going to have to, the Magic are going to have to own that this is a possible outcome for them. The fact that the Magic have struggled so much, even considering all the injuries, is, yes, a sign that things must change, that the Magic must begin to add new pieces to the lineup, find ways to plug holes that the team is struggling to fill right. Now, all that is still very much in play. But it is also a statement of this team is better than they are, than their record, that they still have an extra gear to get to. And the hope, one of the big hopes for the Orlando Magic during the course of the rest of the season, during these last 26 games, is to see this team get healthy again. It's to see this team as it was meant to be seen, as they thought they would be when they ran the Miami Heat off their home court, off Pat Riley Court at Kaseya Center on opening night. The Magic haven't been able to see that team since October at the least. And we saw what that looked like against the Pistons just about a month ago now. Jalen Suggs has missed 19 of the past 20 games. But there is still just getting healthy will help this team figure out what the next step is, what the next move is. And yeah, like, again, I'm not sitting here saying that it's not super obvious. They need shooting. They need some playmaking. They need some creating. But seeing Jalen Suggs and this team and how close and how good they are probably speaks to how big that move needs to be. Is it something on the margins? Clearly not. If the Magic felt like something on the margins was going to be good enough, they would have done something at the deadline on the margins. Does it need to be a starter? Do they need to move Kentavious Caldwell-Pope? Some of that might be what they have to figure out the rest of the season. But ultimately, those are far long-reaching thoughts. And getting Suggs back is going to help with the ultimate goal for the rest of the season. Frankly, the Orlando Magic should have one thing that they can judge as success over the last 26 games. The Magic have to be the 6th seed. Finish above 500, get to your 42 wins, get to 42-40. That would be, I don't know what that would be. I'll look that up. I'll look that up for tomorrow's episode, but get to 42-40, get the 6th seed, make the playoffs. At the end of the day, that is all that matters. And we'll talk with Jason here in a minute about it. But the Magic's main goal for the rest of the season has to be make the playoffs. Be a playoff team. And yes, that might mean you are fodder for the New York Knicks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Boston Celtics. Losing in a playoff series is still extremely valuable for a team that is still on the ascent. This Magic team is not done growing. They will get better. They will continue to grow and expand and improve, and getting to seeing what works and what doesn't in the playoffs, especially that main trio of Suggs, Paolo, and Franz, is still the most important thing. Still proving to yourself and to the rest of the league, the only reason we are sitting in the 6th seed, the only reason we are sitting in this play-in position is because of the injuries. I think that is a thought that is throughout the entire league, that the Magic are just down because of the injuries. It isn't because there's a problem with the project. It isn't because Paolo is worse or Franz isn't good enough or anyone's not good enough. They have holes they need to fill. No one's denying that. But the Magic have to prove they can take the next step. And right now, that next step is just continuing to prove you belong. Whether you want to believe it or not. And look, the team put the marker out there, said we want to win home court advantage. That was a great goal to have. A big part of this season was proving last year wasn't a fluke. It was beginning to establish yourself as a perennial playoff team. Not a play-in team, not a team on the margins, a playoff team. We can blame the injuries for the Magic not competing for the things we thought and hoped they would compete for. But the Magic have to establish themselves as a playoff team. They have to position themselves as a team that will make the playoffs. And so there is a clear red line that you have to clear. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't think the play-in would be the worst thing in the world. Get into the playoff field no matter what. If the Magic do not win in the play-in tournament, if they're in the play-in tournament, they lose that, we're looking at a failure of a season because you missed that opportunity to play in the playoffs. Again, even if you're shipping back up to Cleveland and having to play them again, or shipping to Boston, shipping out to Boston and playing them again, the playoff experience is still extremely valuable, especially going up against championship contending teams that you believe you're going to have to beat down the road. You want to measure up against those teams. Those are the teams we want to measure ourselves against. That's fine. Winning in the play-in, I think, is ultimately valuable for a young team, too. We saw this team play a Game 7 last year. They know what that pressure is like. Winning under that pressure is a different thing. You can give a team like the Magic a different confidence, but you don't want to risk your playoff spot. Ultimately, being in a 7-game series, knowing what you have to know, seeing what you have to see in those types of games is far more valuable. And so ultimately, I know I like to hedge. I know I like to say this, that, or the other thing. I know I like to say, well, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. There's something in the middle. I will be unequivocal. The Magic's goal, the thing they must accomplish in the last half of the season is make the playoffs, and they need to be the 6th seed. No offense to our friends with the Pistons. The Magic need to make up that 2.5 game gap. They need to win the Southeast Division. They need to be a playoff team. The Magic know this. You know this. I know this. It's still the goal for this team. And in that sense, the Magic's goals are still very much in front of them. That's all that matters right now. Make the most of the group that you have. Push them to their limits, and we've seen some of those limits. push them to those limits, find the grit and determination to get back to the playoffs. It's all that matters. And with that, let's dive back into our conversation with Jason Beede. We'll talk a little bit more about the Orlando Magic's trade deadline, what he learned from speaking with Jeff Weltman, the Magic's president of basketball operations. We will also chat a little bit about what the rest of the season means for the Orlando Magic and their future, because again, as I've always said, this season is not about this season. It is about the future that you're developing. We're going to get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Football season may be over, but the basketball action is just heating up. And there's no better way to get in on the excitement than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. It's simple. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. And if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you can control the action all season long. For example, during the Super Bowl, during the big game a few weeks ago, I put in a little Prize Picks. I projected that I took a free play square. They give you a lot of free play squares. Patrick Mahomes, more than a half passing yard. I took, I believe, Xavier Worthy on receiving and rushing yards combined. That one nearly didn't hit. I took, I believe it was a Saquon Barkley receiving yards, and I won. I won all 3. Clean sweep. Got my money, turned a $10 bet, $10 pick into $50. It's really that simple. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And we are back for part 2. Not for Jason. He's just kind of sitting while I put my ad animation on. But we're back for part 2 here with our All-Star break check-in with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel. I won't ask you how you're doing, Jason, and pretend like this is a new day and a new conversation. If you listen to part 1, it's in your feed. You know where to find it. This is probably the episode that the audience is really looking forward to, because it's not just about this season. Everything is always an audition. You know, Jeff Weltman has always had a very long-term view of this team and of this season. So we've taken care of what the stakes are in the immediate, but there's obviously bigger stakes for this team. You are one of the 2 people that got to talk to Jeff Weltman, 2 members of the media that got to talk to Jeff Weltman after the trade deadline. It is still a very contentious thing among Orlando Magic fans. Let's start with this then. What were your takeaways from your conversation with Jeff and his approach to the trade deadline, considering everything that's happened this season?
Yeah, I spoke with Jeff after the trade deadline last year. That was my first season on an NBA beat. I didn't really know how to go about asking a president about the trade deadline. Like, I knew what I wanted to ask, but it was like my first time ever doing that last season. And I remember asking, how close did you come to making a trade? And he gave me a very PR answer and said, you'd have to ask the other team because it takes 2 teams to make a trade. And then going into this year, I made my request. I knew I wanted to talk to Jeff after the deadline. He knew he wanted to talk to me. And I asked it differently. And I said, what went into the result of a trade not being made? Because I didn't want to hear that, well, you have to talk to the other teams. I felt like Jeff this year compared to last year was much more candid, much more open about how aggressive they were. He was went on the record, shared much more details. He told me names about players that teams called on. He told me that they know they need shooting. He told me that they were aggressive. Teams were aggressive towards them. And he also told me about the future of his plan. And that's knowing that they want to be aggressive at some point. I think the biggest thing is he was much more open in this year's conversation compared to last year's conversation, which I think he had no option but to be, right? Because again, this is the second year. Like, Jeff's been around. This is his eighth year.
Yeah, 7th or 8th year. Yeah.
7th or 8th year. And the last 2 years, he hasn't made a deal. And people can say, well, he hasn't done anything. Every year before that, he had made a deal whether for a player or not is different. But at the deadline, since 2017, all those seasons leading up to last year, he had made some sort of transaction on deadline day. And now that's 2 deadline days in a row where he hasn't made a deal. So it felt like to me he had to be more candid, more open about what led to that. And that was my biggest takeaway from the conversation.
Yeah, you're a reporter. It's not your place to kind of give your opinion necessarily on what the Magic should or shouldn't have done. So I don't want to necessarily ask that, but I think what I took away from your interview with Jeff and from the other interview you did with your colleague Mike Bianchi on his radio show was that it really felt like teams sensed the Magic were desperate for something and were pushing for things the Magic weren't ready to give up. And part of that is that the Magic, I feel like, are trying to save some things in the quiver for what could shake out in the offseason. I know I said this a million times. I'm sure I've said it to you and Mason in the press room. The biggest deadline acquisition the Magic could make was always going to be Paolo and Franz coming back healthy and Jalen now coming back healthy. That was always going to be the biggest thing they could make. There's probably nothing on the trade market that was going to change what the Magic have. Did you sense from talking with Jeff that his thinking was, I think he said it. I think he said it to you. He might have said it to Mike about that. He didn't want to put a Band-Aid on the team. That he was thinking this is more about the next 2 to 3 years than it is about today, or that it's about a long-term game rather than a short-term one.
Yeah, I mean, I can read the quote. I have it right in front of me. He said, "We didn't feel it was the right thing to do to part ways with significant assets just to kind of plug holes and put a Band-Aid on something. We will assess the team. We'll understand how best we need to look going forward. And in order to execute that, we'll keep all of our arrows in our quiver." Like you just use quiver.
Yeah. I like to mimic I like to use their language.
So, yeah, I remember last year, this year he used Band-Aid. Last year he used sweetener. Like he didn't want to just get a sweetener to fix the 3-point, or I think they were going to fix the 3-point shooting with just some guy. As they've learned with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, just because you sign a guy who shoots 40% from 3 for the last 5 years and has been in the upper 30s his entire career pretty much, doesn't mean he's going to suddenly do that in Orlando. And I don't know if something's in the water, but they thought they were getting a guy who could shoot from distance. And we talked about in the previous episode about his January, but for majority of the season, he hasn't been that guy. And maybe we'll see more of what he thinks he is, what he has been in the past in the final 26 games of the season, because that would be really big. With that said, yeah, I think whether it's a good tactic or not, Jeff's thinking is, we're going to save what we have. We're not going to make a quote unquote panic move, because in their mind, even though you look at the past month of Magic basketball, they don't think they're a team that needs to panic. And I think fans and some around the media should at least understand where he's coming from, and the fact that he's not going to make a drastic decision, because let's say they had made some move and it was drastic, and maybe it lets them shoot a little bit better this season, but those first round picks turn into something next year, and why'd they trade for that, that veteran guard for, this young player and this first round pick? Look at what this player has become. Why didn't they keep on to, Jeff told me on the record, teams called about Tristan da Silva. So let's say they use Tristan da Silva and a first round pick to get a veteran guy who can shoot the ball really well, and that guy shoots the ball really well, and make the playoffs and whatever. And then in the future, we see Tristan become an all-star player or starter in this league. And then fans, it's I don't want to say it's a lose-lose for Jeff, but it's a difficult situation. And I think you have to respect him for holding his values, right? He knows what he believes in. He has a plan. He has a big picture. We hear about the, keeping sight of the North Star. That takes time. And I understand they've said patience for a while. We hear that a lot within the Magic organization. It's hard to remain patient when you see a Luka Doncic getting traded or an Anthony Davis. Obviously they weren't making that type of move.
Everybody loves to play with the trade machine.
Right. No Everybody likes to do that. And the hypotheticals are so easy. Look, it's not 2K. It's not. Players don't come back from injury like that. Trades aren't done like that. And I think I'm not saying what he did was right or wrong. I'm just saying I understand where he's coming from. And we all know trades are easier to be done in the off season when money's more clear, players are more, roles are more defined. And look, it's not like he's not saying he's not going to make those moves in the future. He told me that they want to be aggressive. They know they need to make some sort of move basically in the future because they know they have these pieces, they chips are piled up and they're ready to push them into the table. Just didn't come with this deadline. And as frustrating as it might have been for some fans, if he had done some risky move and messed up the locker room chemistry or messed up the offense or messed up the defense, and let's say it didn't work, that would have been bad because then you're with a team that doesn't mold together and you're without your assets. Like right now, they know that this team wasn't healthy and they know that their best players haven't been up to their best. Maybe Franz has, but they're still all working through things. They're all still working through their rotations, through their minutes, through their roles and adjusting to those injuries. I just think, obviously the shooting has been a problem for multiple years, but if they had made some drastic change, I don't know exactly how that would have helped. And by evaluating this current team and what this team looks like in the final 26 games, you already know that this team doesn't shoot that well. So let's see what this team can accomplish. And then you go to the offseason and you say, look, we're ready to be aggressive now. And I know teams are going to know that they're going to want to make a move, but at that point in time, things will become much more clear, which generally thinking that should be a better time to make a move rather than 250 on deadline day when you know that you've lost 10 of your last 12 and you're quote unquote desperate.
Yeah, and like it's old wrestling adage, like let things play out. Sometimes you have to trust the bookers to know this is the story we're trying to tell and let things go out. But to that point, like I do think things open up at the trade in the offseason that aren't open at the trade deadline. You have a team, I'm just going to pick a random team I'm looking up at my board, like the Phoenix Suns, who think they're still a playoff team, who are still committed to this core. We know they were trying to deal Bradley Beal. We know that there was maybe some inroads about Kevin Durant. They didn't pull the trigger on those. Maybe they pulled the trigger on that in the offseason and they opened up for business. Or the LA Clippers perhaps maybe look for a change or look to change things up and they open up for business a little bit. A team doesn't succeed in the playoffs the way that they think they should or could. They decide, we've gone as far as we can with this group. We have to blow things up. They're not looking to make that deal at the deadline. They're waiting for the offseason. The Magic are in a good position. Maybe one of the benefits of not having so great a season this year is their own draft pick is going to be more valuable. It's going to be a little higher than maybe they anticipated. That could be something they use as well. They got 2 of them in this year's draft and probably don't need a rookie. So there is definitely, I think, more doors that open in the offseason. So I agree with the frustration. Like I was on here advocating, saying they needed to do something. I understand that they didn't want to sell the farm to do something. I was looking at something on the margins that didn't present itself. We'll see what he does this offseason, and then we'll bring our pitchforks out after that. But that still leaves us with 26 games and a lot to sort through. Let's talk. We'll when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the pressure that is on this Magic team to perform and make the playoffs. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break from our conversation with Jason Beede to tell you a little bit about our friends over at Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back on your refund. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available TurboTax live full service, real-time updates only, and iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. So clearly, back here with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel. So clearly, there were players that other teams wanted. You mentioned Tristan da Silva. That the Magic weren't ready to kind of give in on or give up on. Or I don't give up on, it's kind of harsh, but weren't willing to put into these kinds of deals that they might have been seeking. How much pressure does that put on these last 26 games for someone like maybe a Tristan da Silva? He's a rookie. Maybe he doesn't have that much pressure, but someone like Anthony Black, for instance, like my gut instinct is a lot of the deals the Magic were looking for, teams were saying, give us Anthony Black and you got yourselves a deal. And the Magic weren't ready to do that. He'll be halfway through his rookie contract. It'll be extension time next summer, not this summer, but next summer. How much pressure are on players like Anthony Black? Wendell Carter said these are the most important 26 games of his career. Before we talked to him against Charlotte, he said 27. I'll sick him and say 26. These are the most important games of his career. How much pressure is on this team to kind of prove who belongs with this group that's been together for so long moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Last year when there weren't any trades made, I should say, players moved. I remember there was like a sense of relief in the locker room, but also like a sense of pride. Like that core group, even more so like this year than last year, that core group was like, let's finish the job. Like let's do this. I think this year, there was obviously a sense of relief for guys like Cole, for guys like, Wendell couldn't get traded, but Cole and maybe even Jet Howard or some of those, Caleb or whatever. There was obviously always a sense of relief for any player. We talked to Corey Joseph. He said, good to see you again. But I think where last year the group thought, we're in this together, let's go do it. The front office last year felt like, to me, it was more of an intentional decision not to make a move. Whereas this year they ended up not making a move, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah,
this year the group's kind of like, obviously they're thankful that they're all still together, but it feels more like that's just kind of how things played out rather than.
Yeah, like Mo Wagner's like articulated it the best. Like what's happened in Orlando over the last 3 years doesn't happen in the NBA. And they've been, like Mo has said it very specifically, like I'm very thankful to be in this situation, to be in a place that values this continuity, that sees the value in having the same people, but we all know that it's not going to last. And it's sort of, I agree with you. It doesn't, like last year, it felt like this front office gave this group the stamp of approval. Go finish the job. We don't need anything else. You guys are enough.
Right.
And this year, it very much feels like this is the end of the road. We've kind of hit our ceiling almost, or bumped up against the ceiling. And whenever that happens in the NBA, you got to find something to break that ceiling. And that means you're taking you're tinkering with the team a little bit. And I think everyone understands and recognizes that, and how they respond to that, I think, is going to be a major storyline of this season, because it's the same group for the last 3 years, essentially. And they have a lot of ownership of this project and the way that they play, but they know it's not going to last. And I think I agree with you. It does kind of feel like, yes, the trade deadline's gone. No one has to worry about it, but they know that the summer is going to be changed.
I was going to say exactly. That's it. Even though there is a sense of relief. Hey, I'm on the roster past trade deadline day, past 3:00. It's 3:01. I'm still in the Magic. They're still in the back of their mind of the summer, and they know that. I don't want to say the front office isn't confident in this current group, because otherwise they maybe would have been a little bit more riskier at the deadline, or risky at all, I guess I should say, because they didn't make any moves. But yeah, I think there's a little brief sense of relief, but less so in the sense of the summer is coming, and Jeff Weltman has said they want to be aggressive. So in order to be aggressive, pieces have to be traded. Like, they're obviously confident in this group, and they know that when the team does get healthy, or at least finds its groove after getting healthy again, it's a really good team. Like, it's, if KCP starts shooting well, and Paolo figures itself out and Franz continues to play at a high level and Jalen comes back, like it is a playoff built roster. Like it's constructed to make the playoffs. The reason it hasn't is because player availability, right? Like as I said on the last episode, 3-point shooting wasn't great last year. Like they were still a bad 3-point shooting team and they finished 5th in the East. As you've said before, if they just shoot 32% from 3, they're a pretty good team. So if they're going to have nights where even if they shoot league average or right below league average, and Paolo does what he does and Franz does what he does, like they're going to win games and make the playoffs. But they also know that making the playoffs isn't what you play in the NBA for. Like this is a team, a franchise that one day wants to be back in the finals and one day wants to capture its first championship. And to do that, everybody knows there's going to have to come change. Like Jeff Weltman is looking forward to being aggressive and making that next step, making that next move to reach that next level where you go from proving you belong in the playoffs to proving you are a contender. Because right now they're not a contender. They're a playoff contending team, but they're not a contender for any championship anytime soon. But if they make the right moves and add the right pieces over the summer, and maybe this takes multiple seasons, as it does with most championship teams, it's just one of those things where there's a sense of relief, but there's also in the back of the mind of like summer's coming. They know that, and they've said they want to be aggressive. And for this team right now, I think there's confidence in this group that they can get back to the playoffs, and that's fine and dandy. But they also know that there's more coming at some point.
Yeah, and I think that is the shadow hanging over this season. Bottom line, and I think this is where we'll have to close it because I do want to just kind of, there's a whole summer out there. We'll get to that after the season ends. Let's end here though. The Magic are currently 7th in the East. They'd be in the play-in. They'd be hosting that play-in game. There's a chance they're 8th. There's a chance they're 9th. There's still that odd chance that they don't advance out of the play-in and make the playoffs. How vital for the front office, for this team, is it to make the playoffs, even if it means losing in 5 to Cleveland or losing in 6 to Boston or whatever that series might be? How important is it just to make that 7-game series again?
No, it's really important. I think it's really important for Paolo. I think it's really important for Franz, for Jalen. Beyond that, I think everybody's expendable. Obviously, after the Luka trade, any player can get traded. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to use the word untouchable ever again because why would they? But with that said, in the framework of your question, it's really important. I think it's really important for Jamal Mosley and who he is as a coach in this league. Like, if you're going to be an NBA head coach and you make the playoffs once and injuries are injuries, like getting back to the playoffs is really hard to do. And I think fans, I don't want to ever say fans are in the wrong, but they maybe take it for granted how difficult that is. And I think some understand that obviously, but I think proving that this is a team that is competitive. And like I said, going back to like, there are levels in the East and you look at his next homestand, they're playing some teams that they should be able to beat with ease. And they're playing challenging teams as well. Like Cleveland. But when you're playing the Charlottes of the world, the Washingtons of the world, the Torontos of the world, those are teams you're above. Like you're beyond that stage of your rebuild. And making the playoffs again to prove that this is a team that belongs in that conversation, that it's absolutely massive. I think it's massive. Like I said, it's massive for everybody involved. It's massive for Weltman as an executive to prove that you're making the right moves or you think you're making the right moves to improve this roster. And he said he has to be aggressive, but I think right now in this current season, now that we're past the deadline, your 15 players are who you have, and proving that you belong in the playoffs as a coach, as a player, that's something they take great pride in. I think no one else more than themselves want to make the playoffs again, because they feel like they belong. Now they have to prove it, and it's challenging, but I think it's crucially important that this team. I can't even think about what exit interviews would be like if they didn't make the playoffs. Even if it's ending in a play-in, like if they're in that 7-8 game and they lose the play-in, like that's going to be, I think, or I guess in that sense they'd have to lose another play-in game. But if they don't make the playoffs, exit interviews would be the vibe would be down bad. As the kids say.
This is the first time since Jamal Mosley took over, since the Nikola Vucevic trade, that they are taking a step back. and how you respond to that, both as a front office and as a team, are really important. I won't put down how valuable winning a 7-8 winner take all game could be, but you're risking a lot.
Right.
I think the reason the play-in exists is for young teams to get experience playing in winner take all games, seeing how they play under that pressure. I think it's still really valuable. This team is beyond that. They experienced that last year. They won a game 6 that they had to win. They played pretty well in game 7 for 2.5 quarters. They've experienced that. They feel they should be above that level, like you mentioned. And now they got 26 games to go prove it to us and earn and win that 6 seed. It's out there for them to take. Like 26 games, if they're as good as we think they are, they can go 16-10 and climb themselves back into the race.
I think I don't want to say the good thing because injuries are never good, but outside of they're still missing Jalen, which, as we've said before on the last episode, which everyone should go listen to.
Yeah.
Jalen's really important. So I can't say I'll say this, they've been mostly healthy recently, and they went 3-2 in the last 5 games. So I'm not saying they've been good, but I want to say this the right way. The good thing is because the reason they've struggled this season is because of player availability, right? It's not like some new
issue.
Right. It's not some
maybe
new
a little
problem.
bit schematic, but they're getting the open shots that you typically want. They're getting the corner threes that are typically part of a good offense. They're just not making them.
And because it's not a new problem, it's shooting. Hypothetically, improving this roster shouldn't be as difficult as what's the next move. Like, the biggest thing is they have their core. They know who to build around. And building around that is going through and adding players like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and eventually another big, and eventually potentially a point guard, and figuring and finding the right pieces. And I think the biggest thing is to remember that this team is where they are is because of injuries. It's not because the last few weeks have been rough, but in the final 26 games, if this team is healthy and they have who they have available outside of Mo Wagner, which again, 6-man can of the year, that's still very significant. But when you have your starters and your starting lineup, right, which they think they should, and they stay healthy, which they think they should, it's what they work towards. This should be a pretty good team that is dangerous, that is fresh, that doesn't have a lot of games under their legs compared to these other teams. Like we said, when Paolo went down for 2 months, they keep talking about playing their best basketball in March and April. Here's their opportunity to do so when they're healthy, when they should be fresh compared to some of these other teams that have been playing 60, 70 games at that point of the year. And then that's when we can really evaluate what this team looks like. And we know that because it is majority of the same roster, that shooting is still going to be a thing. But, going back to your question, how important is it that they make the playoffs? Extremely important, because they know they can, because they have before. And proving it again won't be easy. These games aren't easy, but certainly on paper, you'd think with everybody back, assuming Jalen is ready to go after this break, even if he is going to be on minutes restriction, nothing really should be holding them back after this point if they're going to be fully healthy outside of Mo. If they come back and everybody's healthy outside of Mo and they're still struggling, then you really have to start asking challenging questions, difficult, hard questions about the future of Jamal Mosley, about the future of this roster. And they've already said, from a roster construction standpoint, they're looking forward to being aggressive in the offseason in the future at some point, whether that's this summer, next deadline, whatever it might be. But if everybody gets back, then they can be that team they were in November earlier in the season and towards the later half of last year when they went 17-10 to finish 5th in the East. They should be right back in the playoff hunt, and they should figure it out. But it's the NBA. It's 82 games. It's why you play the games again. Going back to that point.
Yeah, and I think that's the best place to leave it. We got an interesting 26 games ahead. Got a lot to look forward to. It's going to be really fascinating to watch this Magic team, see if they can come together and find themselves. Jason, it's always great to spend time with you. Hope you had a great break. Hope you're happy to see me for the next 2 months as we finish this season off. Jason, thanks again as always, and of course read him at the Orlando Sentinel.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. I don't know if you told your listeners that we're driving to Atlanta together, but that's the thing we're going to be doing with Mason Williams of SI. It should be a fun time, and this final sprint of the season, hopefully the playoffs as well, will be fun to cover and be around this team because it's a great group of guys. They just got to get it together.
Yep, absolutely. Jason, thanks again, man. I want to thank Jason Beede once again for coming on the show, sharing his insight on the Orlando Magic as we hit the All-Star break, coming out of the All-Star break now and getting ready for a big last quarter plus of the season. It's going to be a mad sprint to the finish line. Again, you can check out Jason Beede's work over at the Orlando Sentinel and follow him on Twitter at TheRealBeede. That's Beede. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. Find me on Blue Sky at PhilipRR. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all the Philip Channel podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. You can subscribe to our podcast as well on YouTube. Just search for Locked On Magic. You check out our Locked On NBA squad show up there as well. Should be the episode previous to this one on your feeds. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find us on Twitter at OMagicDaily. And for even more Orlando Magic content, be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub, at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. As always, thank you for your support. Now that you're done listening to me, be sure to check out the Locked On Magic Daily Newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Magic newsletter. That's good too for me today. On tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic, we will talk about how the Magic are focusing up on these last 26 games and the responsibility the Magic Stars have to see them to the finish line. Plus, we'll talk a little bit about the path ahead, including what the Magic's key opponents face. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic. But until then, for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.